I'm with Shai Feldman, the Judith and Sidney Schwartz Director of the Crown Center for Middle East Studies at Brandeis University. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.
You're also the author of many books on Israel, in particular on security, as well as with a concentration on nuclear weapons, nuclear deterrence. And I'm Justine Rosenthal, the editor of the National Interest. I am going to start with something different than the big Iran question, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
The peace process, the other big question of the day. Tell us, what do you think is going on sort of in the minds of the Israeli leadership? Much of the coverage now in America, as you know, is becoming very negative about the settlement issue. Do you think this is a wise choice on the part of the Israeli government or a tactical error? How do you see the situation moving forward?
Well, I'm not sure that I see how the situation is moving forward. I think to some extent, in a way, the whole settlement construction issue has become, in a way, counterproductive. You could call it almost diversion in the following sense. On one side, it's crystal clear that this is a very important environmental issue, which is to say that the continuation of settlement construction created a bad environment for negotiations, because the Palestinians, from their standpoint, could say, you know, if in the end of the day these negotiations are about the terms of your, in our language, ending occupation, then, you know, why are you continuing to construct settlements or construction within settlements and so on and so forth. So it's understandable why this issue has become so central.
Right.
But on the other side, it's also the case that no previous sets of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians were made contingent on dealing with this issue. Oslo, the post-Oslo negotiations, leading up to the negotiations, the extensive negotiations that took place post-Annapolis between the Prime Minister at the time, Ehud Olmert, and Abu Mazen, and the Foreign Minister, and so on and so forth. And if the administration was going to make this now a big issue, instead of saying we will focus on negotiating a deal, right? And a construction freeze will in any case be the outcome of the deal, because once we, for example, agree on the border demarcation, then the issue of where Israelis should be able to build and where they should never build will be absolutely clear. So the administration.
Okay, but we all know that one of the attempts by the Israeli government is to make this change the lines of the negotiations already. Well, there are settlements here now, so you've already what you're willing to potentially take back.
No, but that was the original logic, see, of settlement construction.
Right, and what do you think the logic of continuing settlements is now?
I don't think I think that right now this is not driven by a logic of the Israeli government. I think it's driven by the domestic realities in which the vast majority of the population that supports a deal is passive and silent, and the minority that strongly opposes a deal and also understands that settlements construction is a good way of opposing a deal,
right,
is active and mobilized and committed. And so you have the situation where the governmental level is responding to this gap in intensity between the majority that supports the deal and the minority that's opposed to the deal. Originally, as I said, originally it was the logic of establishing settlements from the government standpoint, especially the good governments of the 70s and so on, was exactly to prevent a Palestinian state from being created. But that has completely, even ideologically, you could say the fault lines have completely changed. They began to change already in 1998 when Netanyahu, as prime minister from Likud, signed the River Accords and transferred control over certain territory to the Palestinians. Then Sharon, with a big change in his mindset, which brought about the disengagement from Gaza, but Sharon also insisted and implemented a disengagement from and the dismantlement of 4 settlements in the northern part of the West Bank. Was this dismantlement significant? No, but it was designed by Sharon to signal that previous logic no longer applies, that we understand there has to be a deal. So I think that original logic no longer drives, not as far as governments are concerned, but it does drive the minority in trying to prevent a deal.
All right, well then let me ask you this, because that sounds compelling to me. Then what it sounds like is that there is a situation where potentially on both sides, the majority of Palestinians and the majority of Israelis want a deal.
Right.
And when you talk to many Israelis, they say, well, we think the Palestinian government doesn't really want a deal, they want to bide their time, they don't want to have to answer to the more vocal hardline, much like you're telling me is now happening in Israel. So, I mean, is this just a non-starter? And if that is the case, there's a part 2 to that question, which is, Israel looks to be in a very bad position demographically. I mean, we hear about this all the time, and the changing character of Israel. So that it felt like or feels like the pressure for a deal is there with for the Israelis, particularly those who want to keep its, I think, its original character.
Right.
So can you speak to those 2 parts of things?
Yeah, first of all, I think that there is, in a way, there is a lot of similarity between what's going on in Israel and what's going on among the Palestinians. In both cases, you have a majority supporting and a very, very active minority mobilized to prevent this. There's a very interesting public opinion project that was conducted over the last few years by my colleague in Ramallah, Dr. Khalil Shikaki, who directs the Palestinian Center for Political and Survey Research, and the Truman Institute in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And what they found, and they administered the same public opinion polls to the 2 publics, and they found that in both publics there is a majority supporting. In both publics there is a majority believing that those supporting a deal on the other side are a minority.
Right.
And on both publics, the majority supporting the deal believe that they themselves are a minority. So you have this mirror imaging and so on and so forth on both sides. I think that you're right that there is a broad understanding in Israel, in my view, the mainstream understands that this continued reality of occupying Palestinians, millions of Palestinians, a few millions of Palestinians against their will, is undermining Israel's legitimacy. The dilemma that the Israelis face, which is exactly why, in my view, a major reason why the majority, despite its preference, remains silent, is because the question that Israelis have not, and I'm talking about now the majority that supports a deal, have not really been given an adequate answer to, is, can they end occupation safely? Which means, because what is their nightmare? They experienced Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon and then being rained by hundreds of Katyusha rockets in the summer of 2006. They then experienced their withdrawal from Gaza and then, Qassam rockets that paralyzed the south of the country. Now, this was in the north and in the south. The West Bank is adjacent to the heart of Israel, where 80% of Israel's GDP is produced. If you essentially had the same reality multiplied from the West Bank, then it would be a catastrophe for Israel. And the problem here is that no one has been able to, until now, the Israelis have not been presented with a credible case to persuade them, yes, we can withdraw safely. And for that reason, the majority, unfortunately, remains passive. Now, that doesn't mean that the U.S. could not do something that would play a role here to reassure Israelis. Unfortunately, I think the United States has not done everything it could do in the last year and a half to provide such assurances.
Let me interrupt you because we're running out of time, and tell me in sort of a word or 2, what is that U.S. guarantee?
No, I'm not talking about a guarantee. There are certain issues that just have to do with the issue of assurances to Israelis. Now, that's different from security guarantees, which is the realm of defense communities and so on and so forth. But I think that, for example, the fact that that the famous Cairo speech that President Obama gave, which opened a dialogue with the Muslim world, which was, I think, very, very important, and I thought the speech itself was masterful, should have been complemented by some move to talk to the Israeli public and to, in a sense, to signal to the Israeli public that they're not being taken for granted, that their concerns are also taken into account. And so I think that, I hope that in the second half of the first term there will be some correction, and certain steps in terms of managing the process will make it more likely that a positive decision will be made.
Thank you very much for being with us today. I hope we can continue with an Iran discussion next time.
Sure.
Thank you.